And we're going to talk about some of the nightmare and the horror of what Donald Trump is doing, has done, and has planned for the people of this country, immigrants in particular, but also the people of the world as we go along. But we want to start by saying, look, last weekend, there was a sea of humanity, of people who are disgusted by what Donald Trump has been doing to people in this country and the horrors that he's inflicting. And they came out. As Rachel Maddow said, they didn't want to put up with this. They wanted to protest, even when being told not to. Even when Donald Trump had unleashed the National Guard and the Marines against people protesting in Los Angeles, people came out anyway. In Minneapolis, St. Paul, and Minnesota, that morning there was a political assassination of a Democratic Party leader and her husband, and another politician who was shot along with her husband. And Tim Walz, the governor of Minnesota, who is beloved by many, many progressive and liberal people who were going to go to those protests, said, stay home, it's not safe, cancel the protest. An estimated 80,000 people poured out into the capital of Minnesota, into St. Paul, in that protest there. People wanted to express their outrage, their opposition, their defiance. And this is important to understand because after Trump got elected, one of the things that was so dispiriting to those in this country who do not like what he's bringing, the demonization of immigrants, the open aggressive white supremacy, the aggressive male supremacy, the hatred towards LGBT people, and in particular, the venom and dehumanization he's unleashing against trans people, the people who don't like the drill baby drill, the people who don't like all the threats that he's made, and the defiance of the courts, all the decent people, including those who voted against him and including those who didn't vote against him or maybe didn't vote at all, but don't like what he's doing, were very demoralized after the election. And one of the things that was like a hammer, a club that was being said over and over by Trump, by the MAGA base, and by a lot of the media is, well, the American people voted for Trump. The American people want this. When he started doing his ICE raids and in more open terror, he said, well, I was elected. This is what people want me to do. This was the claim. The American people want this. And that has always been a lie. And the fact of the matter is, this country is split down the middle. The reality is, there is not one united American people. There are two countries within this country who see things radically differently, who think and feel very differently about what is just and right and what is immoral, illegitimate, and intolerable. And in one section, yes, you have a huge social base of millions who thrill at the fascism and the hatred and the bigotry of Donald Trump, who cheer when he live streams with Dr. Phil the ICE terror raids. They're watching it like entertainment. Families ripped apart, lives destroyed for sport, not of hardened criminals, but of people who have desperately tried to seek a better life, many of whom have lived here and raised families here and worked here for decades, who are just being targeted arbitrarily. So there's people who like that, and there's people who are horrified by that. There's people who laughed about, or at least were willing to look the other way at grab him by the pussy, or the joke that was told, the quote unquote joke that Puerto Rico is an island of garbage. There's people who like that when he says, oh, we want to go back to the day when protesters were sent out on stretchers, and all the kinds of threats and actual violence that Trump has carried out over decades, over a lifetime, and in particular during his first administration, and now aggressively in the first few months of Trump too. There's the people who like that, but there are millions and tens of millions who are horrified by it. And a lot of these people didn't realize how many there were, how much power we have. And coming out on the streets in these numbers, beginning in April, it really started to happen with the hands-off protests on a big scale, but it's continued, coming out in huge numbers. And then last June 14th, this really showed, instead of Donald Trump having his military parade in front of the eyes of the world to project strength and unity behind Trump and a military that's loyal to him rather than to the Constitution and the rule of law, and a country that's subdued and terrorized by him, because he sent out the National Guard, he sent out the Marines in Los Angeles, he's sending out ICE. Instead, the whole world saw a split screen with his really disappointing on his part military parade. I don't want to underestimate still the depth of the horror of him having a military parade and the reality that he's purged the military of generals who would stand up to him and say, I'm, I won't violate the Constitution for you. So it's still significant he had this parade, but it did not look like a show of strength on his part. And instead, the whole world saw, instead of his show of strength, they saw the masses of people in this country rising up and saying no to Donald Trump. And this is highly significant because this massive force of people, this is the one force that is powerful enough to stop the program of fascism, to defeat the program of fascism that Donald Trump and his MAGA regime are rapidly imposing on the people of this country and on the world. And it's very important to understand this, that the one force, and this has been the mission of Refuse Fascism since our inception, and we re-began when Trump got reelected to bring this forward, to call forward those millions and tens of millions of people coming from all the diverse perspectives, political viewpoints, life experience, and visions of the future to come together in mass, sustained, nonviolent protest and resistance on such a level that grows and comes back not one day symbolically and goes home hoping somebody listens, but again and again and again with such determination and courage and huge numbers that we create the kind of profound political crisis in this country such that Trump cannot govern this country. He cannot impose his fascist program, and he cannot even hold on to the reins of power where he is removed. This is the mission of Refuse Fascism, and this is what needs to happen for humanity to have a future outside of the nightmare of a fascist America. So what we saw on June 14th was that force of people showing themselves to the world and showing themselves to each other. And this is profoundly, profoundly important. This is our strength. But there was also a contradiction. So that my first point is, here's the force. It's not one united American people. There is a Trump America, the people who support him, and there's a much bigger section of people who are opposed to this fascism, but they need to be called forward in sustained mass struggle in order for them to defeat this program of fascism. So that's my first point. There's a potential that exists there. The second point I want to make, and this gets to what Rachel Maddow was showing in particular, and the banner that we carried, Trump must go now. And I spoke to this in DC, as did other speakers. There is a lot of strength in people standing up to Trump in different ways, and it's happening across this country. June 14th was one expression, but it's been the massive outpourings against the ICE raids, very courageous, very heroic. It's been the people refusing to bow down to and be cowed by him unleashing the military and instead continuing to stand up overwhelmingly, nonviolently. That's what we are calling for as well. But not just in LA in that way, but across the country, there were rallies of solidarity against the occupation and against the ICE raids. There's been institutional resistance, Harvard, certain law firms that have stood up to Trump. There's been students who have defied Trump and protested, including at their graduations. There's been a lot of different forms of protest, some of them quite heroic and very powerful, inside the institutions and outside, and in the streets in these mass protests. But as crucial as that is, this protest up until now has largely been oriented towards opposing Trump, opposing this or that program of Trump's, this or that measure, this or that atrocity, freeing this detainee, freeing this section of detainees, standing up against a law and filing a lawsuit, standing up in protection of this or that right. And what we say in Refuse Fascism is all of these fights are necessary, but they are not enough. It's necessary to stand up against the vicious, dehumanizing assault on trans people, but it is not enough. It is righteous and it's necessary to stand up against the ICE terror and the raids, and this needs to go to even greater levels. There needs to be tens of thousands. Imagine thousands and thousands in the streets, literally surrounding and making non-violently, but making it impossible for this terror to be illegitimate, illegal terror to be carried out. So this is necessary. It is righteous, but even that is not enough. There is righteous when the institutions stand up to the degree they have. It's necessary, but it's not enough unless and until the Trump fascist regime is removed from power. It will barrel over even the most powerful opposition. Trump, and more importantly than Trump himself, the power of the presidency in the hands of this fascist is more powerful and can absorb and barrel ahead in the face of even very important protest unless he is removed from power. And we see this. He's slowed down by the courts on something. He takes it to the Supreme Court, as he did today, and he got a green light to deport people to countries they've never even been before, they have no ties to, and into conditions of torture. The Supreme Court just said you can do it, and you can do it without 24-hour notice. This is absolute atrocity. This is a complete violation of the rule of law, of due process. And I don't care if the Supreme Court, that was packed with fascist judges by Donald Trump, says it's okay. This is a fascist measure. It's one example among many of how Trump can be slowed down and needs to be slowed down through resistance and opposition. But unless he's removed from power, he will barrel ahead. And the program of fascism will barrel ahead. And so what we're saying is that the protests, the resistance, the struggle needs to go from mass opposition, which is righteous, to an active orientation to raise the demand that the Trump fascist regime must go now and not stop with the resistance, nonviolent, but not certainly determined, not stop until that demand is won, until we create the level of profound political crisis through our massive nonviolent protest and actions that we compel a realignment among those who are in the halls of power such that they see the need to remove Trump. They will not do it absent this push from below and a massive sustained push. So that is what we're fighting to transform, from opposition to oriented to defeating fascism by driving the regime out nonviolently. And this is why it was so important for us to lead that protest in DC. And there was three big arguments that we heard about why not protest in DC. And one of them was, if you protest in DC, and we hear this a lot, if you protest in DC, Trump might use it as an excuse to declare martial law. And we said, well, first of all, Trump was jumping the gun on that, deploying the military in the streets of this country against the people. He was putting a military on parade that's been purged, a fascist military he's remaking in a fascist way on parade. He was moving towards martial law on his own. He is moving towards fascism on his own. And the surest way to accelerate that is to capitulate in advance, to lie down and say, we're not going to fight this. So we said, no, we have to be here. We have to stand up. It's great people are standing up across the country. I've spoken to how powerful that is, but it needs to be opposed here where the eyes of the world will be in DC up against this. Second, people said, well, it's really important we have protests nationwide. And this wasn't said as explicitly as often, but there was a logic being put forward, and it was said quite a bit that by having nationwide protests, we will be positioning ourselves in a good way for the midterm elections and then the next presidential elections, to take back the House, take back the Senate, and then get in position to either impeach maybe or have a better position for the next elections. And to this, we said, this is outrageous because the elections, first of all, are way too late. Donald Trump is carrying out crimes against humanity by the day. I mean, that's what the bombing of Iran just was. Unprovoked, aggressive. That's a war crime. That's what the threat to assassinate the head of another state is when he made that threat. He is carrying out atrocities. He's ripping families apart by the day. He's violating rights by the day. He's purged the military of trans people. These atrocities are happening, and he's violating the rule of law, including threatening, arresting, and brutalizing elected officials for opposing him, for exercising their legal responsibility as elected officials. This is right out of Hitler's playbook. So waiting for the elections is way too late. The atrocities are happening by the day. And furthermore, anybody who thinks that Donald Trump will respect an election he loses is not paying attention. He already tried an insurrection the first time in 2021. He pardoned the January 6th insurrectionists. That's giving the green light. He's never committed to accepting an election he loses. He always says it's fraud if he doesn't win, or if he wouldn't win. And what did he say when he threatened Gavin Newsom with arrest? When he said Tom Homan should arrest Gavin Newsom, the mayor of California. When they asked Trump why he thought he should be arrested, these are literally his words. He said he should be arrested for running for governor. This is Trump saying anybody who's not part of MAGA is illegitimate to be in power. They should be arrested. They should not be allowed. So the idea that we can rely on the elections and this guy to respect the election and his base to respect an election is beyond lunacy. It's dangerous, it's deadly, and it's unacceptable. So we need to have him removed now. And the third reason that people gave for not protesting in DC, and I'm going into these because this wasn't just about, oh, we had a good protest in DC. These are the logic of these arguments sits on people beyond the DC protest. They sit on people and they are holding back the very, very positive impulse that people have to stand up against what Trump is doing, but they're distorting how people understand what needs to be done. So the third argument people made is if you protest in DC, somebody might get hurt. Donald Trump threatened very big force against protests there. There could be danger, there could be harm brought to people. And I want to be clear, we do not take sacrifice and harm lightly. We look out for each other. We value everybody who is standing up. We have to have a culture where we have each other's backs, and we don't allow ourselves to get provoked or get into a situation where people get hurt for no good reason in ways that could be prevented. But at the same time, we are very clear, and everybody should be clear, that there has never been an advance for the oppressed. There has never been an oppressive force that's been defeated without people making sacrifices. It's just never happened. Everybody likes to talk about John Lewis getting into good trouble. What was his good trouble? He walked across the Edmund Pettus Bridge knowing there was a mob of racist white state troopers and Klansmen on the other side with baseball bats. He had his skull cracked open. Other people gave their lives, and we uphold that because there were bigger things at stake than anybody's individual safety. There was the conditions of an entire oppressed people who needed to be liberated of that Jim Crow system. Okay, and it was worth it. That's why everybody celebrates him and Good Trouble. That's why we celebrate the Freedom Riders and the Freedom Summer Volunteers and other freedom fighters. It's not because they played it safe and put themselves above everybody else. It's because they were selfless for something that was more important than their own safety. And in that context, they looked out for each other and they were righteous and they changed history. And you could go through any struggle, the struggle for LGBTQ rights, the struggle for women's rights, the struggle for immigrant rights. Go down the list. It has always required struggle and sacrifice. And today will be no different. And the same thing around the world. So we have to stand up and we have to be willing to do something that is about something bigger than ourselves. And this is going to be really important as part of what it's going to take to defeat Trump MAGA fascism. We're going to have to come out in our millions, which we've seen exist, and we're going to have to overwhelm this regime and demand its removal. But we do have to demand its removal. And so I just want to drive this point home from one more angle by talking about what fascism actually is. And I began by saying it's not a curse word, it has meaning. Fascism is not just a collection of really horrific policies. Fascism is a qualitative change in the form of rule, a change in the form of government. What it means essentially is you have no rights. You have no dissent. It's not protected. You have no due process. You have no recourse. If the fascist regime says you're an enemy and disappears you, that's the end. There's whole peoples who get demonized, dehumanized, and disappeared, often through really horrific violence. Starts on a small scale, but it expands from there. Once people become normalized to it, once the state grabs new authority and power, and the people are either normalized to it or their resistance is broken, then there's no recourse. And the most crucial thing to understand is that once fascism is consolidated, it is extremely difficult to have the space to fight against it. And the more common thing in history is when fascism has been consolidated, it has taken decades, or it has taken a war by other powers from outside the country, waging war on that country to break the hold of fascism. And so the lesson is you have to defeat fascism before it's consolidated, before it becomes too late. And in this country, fascism comes with the political content that Donald Trump is giving it, which is rooted in the history of this country, which is brutal, open, aggressive reassertion of blatant white supremacy, blatant racism of the most horrific kind. That's what the attack on DEI is. Whatever you think of DEI's effectiveness to deal with discrimination, there's critiques that might be valid to make on that. But whatever you think of that, what Trump is doing is purging Black people, immigrants, women, disabled people in the name of getting rid of DEI. And it's right down the line in terms of the threats and the force that he wants to unleash. It's open, aggressive reassertion of white supremacy. One of Trump's people literally said, you need to put competent white men in charge. And Trump is putting white men, Christian fascists and racists and crusaders in charge. It is in the service, his fascism is in the service of open, aggressive reassertion of male supremacy, hatred of women, brutal subjugation of women, including denial of women's right to abortion, and soon it will be birth control, forcing women to have children against their will, which is a form of enslavement, and the sexual predation and grossness of that Trump brings along as well. It includes the hatred of LGBT people, and right now the spear point pointed particularly viciously at trans people, dehumanizing trans people, banning medical care, gender-affirming medical care for trans youth, purging trans people from the military, saying by their very nature, they have no honor. They cannot be trustworthy. This is just the beginning of a massive erasure of trans people throughout society and cruelty that follows that, and then the rest of the LGBT spectrum. And the third major component of the political content of fascism under Trump is the hateful, vicious xenophobia, the hatred of immigrants, and everything foreign, which you see in the massive sweeps. And Donald Trump made this lie a part of his campaign, that he's going to round up all the hordes of immigrant criminals. But because it was a lie that there's so many immigrant criminals, now he's having to carry out these raids against people who are not criminals, just regular people living their lives on a massive scale. And it is only the beginning. And he's rendering them, sending them around the world to torture prisons, forever prisons, to countries that are in the midst of civil strife and civil war and places where they're likely to be tortured. It is a form of mass terror, and it's going to be ramping up. So this program of male supremacy and hatred of LGBT people, open white supremacy, and hatred of immigrants and all things foreign is the content, the political content of who's targeted. But the form of rule that fascism is a form where you have no rights, no recourse, no rule of law. The law is what Trump says it is. and with all the content I just spoke to. And we see it with him defying the courts. We see it with the way he's unleashed the military against the people already. All of this will be heightened if he's not stopped and removed from power. This is why he has to be ousted non-violently, but now as soon as possible, not waiting for the next elections. So finally, I want to speak about July 1st through 4th. Okay, so I made the case. We have the power of the people that can defeat this. The millions and tens of millions exist who oppose this. That's a political force to contend with. That's my first point. The second point, this force needs to go from just opposing Trump to recognizing we need to defeat this fascism, which means driving the regime from power now, not in the next election cycle, now. So third, how do we go at that? What do we do next? There's a lot of things that need to be done. One of them is people need to stand up everywhere that Trump is carrying out his crimes and his forces are unleashed to do this. People need to protest non-violently, but with great determination and great numbers. Get everybody out in the streets when ICE shows up. Get everybody out in the streets and stand up against the attacks that are coming in other dimensions. Raise the demand. Trump must go now. Popularize that demand. Raise that 2028 is just too late. So spread that understanding. But then there's also, we are calling for a convergence on July 4th in Washington, D.C. and the days leading up to it. And here I want to say, July 4th is this country's biggest holiday celebrating itself. It's the day everybody's supposed to get out there and feel really good about this country, wear their red, white, and blue, have their cookout, do whatever, watch the fireworks, all of this. This is a day 5 years ago that Donald Trump went to Mount Rushmore. Maybe people will remember this. He went to Mount Rushmore, and in the middle of the 2020 uprising against the murder of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor, and he said, my face should be on this mountain. And he used that day to smack down and threaten and insult the uprising for justice against police brutality and white supremacy. And he used it to resurrect and invoke the legacy of slave owning presidents and the slave owning side of them. And the Andrew Jackson, who carried out the Trail of Tears, the forced removal of Native peoples from their homelands. And he did all of this on July 4th to really reassert MAGA in the face of the outcry for justice. And so on this day, we want to be in DC on July 4th, when the eyes of the world are thinking about what's the character of this country. We want not blind patriotic jingoistic celebrations. We want a split screen once again where they can have their fireworks, but we are going to be here saying, in the name of humanity, we refuse to accept a fascist America. And we are going to use this day to declare our independence from Trump's fascist America. And some people are going to do that because they feel it's their highest patriotic duty and the highest expression of patriotism. And some of us are going to do it because we actually oppose what this country has stood for at its core from its founding. And we're going to stand shoulder to shoulder and say, we don't want Trump's fascist America. And we're going to issue a declaration of independence from Trump's fascist America with an indictment, a bill of particulars of his crimes. And what it means to win that independence from Trump's fascist America is that we are raising the demand, Trump must go now, and putting that before the country and calling forward many, many more waves of struggle, nonviolent struggle, but growing to realize that demand. That's what it will take to get independence from Trump's fascist America, is sustained mass outpourings of protest and resistance. And on July 4th, we want the country to see a massive convergence in front of the White House. The biggest chant ever heard round the world. We want to raise the chant, Trump must go now. And we want people to fly in from all over the country, take the train in, hitchhike in, carpool in. Maybe don't hitchhike, but carpool in. Get yourself there. If you're in DC, open your home and host some other people and come out in the streets with them and be part of the biggest chant the world has ever heard in DC, July 4th, and help spread this demand so the millions who hate what's happening start to see this is what we have to take up too. We are going to start in DC on July 1st, and we're going to have a lead up. And in just a moment, I'm going to stop talking, and Ralph and Morgan will tell you more about the plans on the ground in the DMV. But we're going to start by welcoming people with a block party fundraiser, get to know each other. Each day there's activities to get out to masses of people, spread the word, stir the air, reach the tens of thousands and the millions in the area, and call on them to come out. So it's like a big rolling drum roll of activity, of agitation, of protest, of disruptive nonviolent protest, to get in the media, to get in the social media, to get in people's commutes, and let them know, hey, we got to shake things up. We got to change our plans. We got to be out there together to raise the biggest chant ever. And this will be a chance for people around the country to learn to work together, to become part of this movement, to strengthen what happens on July 4th in the nation's capital, and bring that energy as we go back and fan out around the country. And on June 17th, there is a next day of national action that is being promoted by Indivisible, where we're going to want to join with that and bring this message even more powerfully out to all the millions who'll be active that day. So this July 4th is the next punctuation point, not a protest just because we need to have another protest, a protest with a mission of inserting this demand: Trump must go now. And the logic of it much more forcefully in front of the eyes of the tens of millions of people who hate what's happening, who've stood up against what's happening, but who need to take up this demand as their own and join in making this the terms of struggle until we win that demand and Trump really is removed from office.